listening to Spare Notes. My name is Jonah. I write about music and I write fiction. I talk to artists and folks in the music and literary industries about their creations, inspirations, evolutions, and communities, and find out how they create and reflect on their art. What can we learn from the conversations with people who create art and things related to the art community? I recently interviewed the poet, writer, and my friend Misha Tentser. Overall, we explored many aspects that involve using language to delve into complex emotional experiences, including music, childhood experiences, psychogeography, mental health, and much more. With our conversation, I wanted to raise a specific question, and that is, what is it like to emotionally confront complex life events, and how can that impact or affect our relationship with art we make or contribute to or consume? First of all, congratulations on getting your master's. Yay! In creative writing. How you feeling?
I feel good. I mean, kind of coincided with a bunch of things. Like, I moved in with my partner and started working full time and, felt like a lot of changes. I felt like a lot of grief all at once too, because it was a positive, it was like a positive celebratory thing, but there was also, some loss involved. And that made me feel a range of things.
A loss of like being done with the program, the MFA program?
Like a loss of structure. Like, I have a poem due by Friday on Friday by 11:59 or something. Now it's just like I'm just writing and I'm just living, and figuring it out on my own. And that feels good in a lot of ways, but it's also that structure is like a fire under my ass. Like it feels like, okay, I have something to do. I have somebody to answer to or for or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and figuring that stuff out on my own has felt good, but also challenging sometimes in the sense that it's like not always clear. Like I find myself stealing time places. Like I find myself, I don't know, even at work sometimes like stealing a little bit of time to work on a poem on my lunch break or something, or like I don't know, at the doctor's office like scribbling or doing iPhone notes or something. And it's just a different pace. It feels like a different sort of uh relationship to writing than I had before.
How long ago did you graduate? I don't remember the date.
Well, I mean, technically, I guess in April, but I just submitted my thesis finally, and
Awesome.
I felt like I was lagging a little bit in the sense that I kind of didn't want it to end fully, you know. But I finally submitted it, and it was signed off on, and all looks well. And that I still don't have my diploma though because I think I gave them the wrong address,
Oh
so I
no.
may have to like figure out when it's delivered and then drive by and just like snatch it or something. I don't know. So hopefully that goes okay. But yeah, it hasn't been that long, but I also haven't had that much time to really like just exist after the
Sure.
graduation. Like it's felt immediately like, okay, cool, time to work, time to, do the things you need to do in order to survive. And you know, changes things.
Was there any anxiety with that? I definitely had some anxiety. But you have like this job at the Everson that's kind of like keeping you occupied at least too, yeah? At the Everson Museum.
Yeah, the museum has given me some nice structure. I've also gotten a chance to do a lot of creative writing stuff there, in a community setting with people, mm, many of whom are like former English teachers or writers in other capacities. So like they do, marketing or something, or like copywriting, and they do poetry as like a side sort of project, or they do any form of creative writing as like an expressive outlet. and that's been really rewarding. But also it's a lot of like, yeah, there has been some anxiety in the sense that like nobody's paying me to write anymore, you know.
That's very true.
uh which was a blessing, obviously, but you know, I got used to it a little bit. I liked it. It felt comfortable. It's like being in a bathtub, you know?
Yeah,
You don't want to get out. You're just like cooking in there.
3 years in a bathtub. That's a pretty good
That's right.
amount of time to relax. Not relax, but be in a situation that feels comfortable.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit how you got into writing? Like, yeah, how'd you get into writing?
Yeah. So worked in hospitality for like 10 years prior to taking any sort of writing seriously, in the sense that I used writing and mostly poetry as like an expressive outlet, and a way to connect with myself and check in with myself during times when I was doing something else for money. Um, and it became a sort of like, you know, I would just write short poems in a journal. And then I went decided to go back to school, and I had no idea what I wanted to study. I thought maybe I would do business, or like
Hmm,
maybe do a business master's of business administration or something. And so I was on track to do that because I had owned a food truck, and I thought like, oh yeah, that's my ticket out, is more food trucks.
nice.
So then I was at a Pima Community College in Tucson, and they, as part of the liberal arts curriculum, they make you take, you know, some arts classes. And I took a creative writing class, having had that experience of writing as an expressive, you know, tool or outlet. And I took this intro to creative writing class, and I loved it, in the sense that it really connected for me on a language level. Like the language play that I was able to do there felt really gratifying, and like something that I felt kind of geared for, you know, like especially growing up in a Russian and Ukrainian household, like you know, English was my second language,
Mm,
and I often was translating for my parents, whether literally or kind of, you know, more figuratively, like, you know, interpreting documents, or
sure.
you know, at the bank or something like this. Um, and so I had that kind of attention to language already built into my functioning. So when I took this class, I felt like, oh, my skills are being utilized in a way that feels really gratifying,
That's nice.
and in a way that feels interesting, like something I could continue to build and pursue. So then I just went all in. I just threw all my cards in on creative writing, and I was like, okay, I think this is it. Not in the sense like this is my ticket out or something, but this is what I want to be doing. Um, and then I took a poetry workshop, I took a short fiction workshop, and I didn't, you know, decide to do grad school until probably like my last year of undergrad. You know, I went back to school a little later,
Sure.
and yeah, I mean, it slowly became a thing where it was satisfying, but it was also like the more I learned about it, the more satisfying it became. Not just in the sense that like, okay, I was functioning at a higher level, or like using language on a higher level. I don't mean that. I just mean like the more I read, the more I learned about how people used language to express complex
Mm,
emotional experiences, the more I got hooked on it. And part of it was definitely like an addictive sort of thing, I
ooh,
think. Um, where when I could express a complex emotional experience through language, or an event or a happening or something, it felt so, I mean, I got that dopamine rush from it,
ooh, that's nice.
that yeah, it felt
Healthy and
good.
nice dopamine rush.
Yeah. And so, I mean, inevitably, like I initially, I think, had that relationship to it where I was like almost addicted to reading, and addicted to figuring out how to express myself in this medium or in this genre or container or whatever. It felt like I needed it to feel like myself, you know?
Hmm, hmm.
Which I'm kind of, you know, moving away from now where I felt like, okay, if I don't write for a couple days, like I feel off or something,
Whoa.
but now I'm reformatting that post, MFA stuff because I want to have a relationship to it that's not strictly based on like receiving or like achieving some sort of pleasurable experience. Like I think that's good and necessary, but it's also like, I've moved more into territory of like, okay, I'm expressing a narrative or I'm telling a story over the course of like several different things.
Yeah.
Um, and that's like a different sort of responsibility or a different sort of like pursuit, I feel like, than just strictly writing for pleasure.
When I started community college, also, I thought I was going to do an associate's in business because I wanted to help the work I was doing building music studios. I wanted to help that company. I'm like, oh, I can get this associates in business, and then I can like understand the business and help help this company thrive. Um, and I ended up falling in love with literature. But I remember reading, you know, uh, reading all these new texts that I'd never read because I hadn't read a lot, in my 20s, and then having all these epiphanies as I was reading all this literature. I was like, what is happening? And like all this expression, like coming out on the page from these different authors was really encapsulating. So it's really interesting how you're changing like your economy of your relationship of your writing since you're out of the program. You're trying to kind of like be in that place where it's not like a necessity, but you're like having a relationship that is that's like healthy, and not in the way that like if you don't tend to it, like it's wrong or you need to produce, but like just have a relationship that's not predicated on a certain kind of performance, more like what are you just trying to say or in this moment and when you want to say it. Is that kind of?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the music studio thing too, and building the studios and stuff because my parents are musicians. They're both classical musicians. My
Yeah.
dad plays piano, my mom plays violin, and I grew up with music constantly in the household.
Yeah.
Like every day, every hour of every day, somebody was teaching a lesson or practicing, rehearsing chamber music or rehearsing for practicing for a recital or a performance with an orchestra or something. Um, and there was never any silence really. Like it was just constant sound and constant
Mm.
music, which sounds great to a lot of people, but also I was like, can everybody just stop making noise for like a few minutes because I feel like I'm going to go insane. And maybe it was like a slow sort of insanity in some ways, but um, also thinking about like my ear for music because I started as a musician and I thought that's what I was going to do before doing the restaurant industry hospitality stuff. I thought, my parents are musicians. This is a world I know and I'm comfortable in. And like, I know the conventions of it. I know
Yeah.
how musicians interact with each other. And like, I'm personable enough to like work with people and not be like so quirky and I don't know, like as in the music industry, it's like sometimes the people that are really good at their instruments are also like nightmares to work with. So I
Sure.
was like, okay, maybe I should do like, music administration or something like
Uh-huh.
this. And
Uh-huh.
anyway, but I started as a musician. And so my ear for music, I think, influenced a lot of the language stuff too, because similar in the sense that, it has music language and writing has musical qualities, obviously, especially poems and the type of poems I try to write. I try to incorporate music into them. It's just a different it's a different language.
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I was actually kind of wondering, like, was it lyrics that you made you start writing poems, or like, oh, I've written the lyrics before, let me try writing these poems, or did you read like a specific author or a specific poem that you're like that you actually started conceptualizing the idea of yourself writing poems? Like when you're in hospitality?
It's funny because I never really paid attention to lyrics when I was listening to music.
Hmm.
Because I found most of, I don't know, like Radiohead, for example. I loved Radiohead. I still love Radiohead.
Me too.
Most of the lyrics, I don't know. I like it doesn't really make much sense. They don't really make much sense. But also they're beautiful because, you know, York is using his voice as an instrument. And that's what I was paying attention to more than lyrics. I did initially, my parents read a lot of Russian poetry to me,
Mm.
and from like Pushkin down to like Kaminsky, like from classical to contemporary basically. And I think that was my introduction to poetry, but I kind of wasn't interested in having a dialogue with that tradition because uh the way I came to poetry was definitely, and to writing, was through music and through language. But when I was in the hospitality industry, I mean, I was dealing with a lot of like mental health stuff and substance use disorder stuff, and it became a way to process more so. So I think I entered it kind of like ass backwards or something. Like
That's cool.
I came at it from a weird, not weird, but just from an alternate sort of perspective, and then slowly started to find the music in it.
Mm,
Um,
that's beautiful.
so now I try to like write toward the musical qualities that I appreciate in other good writing, like, but also, the work I sent you, they're all prose poems.
Yeah, I was going to
So,
ask you, like, how do you define your writing today? Is it poetry? Is it fiction? Is it something else? Prose poems? Yeah, like, is that what you would land on as prose poems?
well, I've been working on new stuff since, the poems that I sent you,
Yeah,
and they're not all strictly prose poems. I mean, I really see it as inherently like a hybrid form. Like the stuff that I'm working on is all hybrid sort of drawing from different things.
yeah.
Short fiction, definitely stories, and poetry. But I think like if I'm writing something and there aren't any musical qualities to the language that I'm using,
Mm.
I'm not automatically like, oh, let's throw it in a prose poem and see what happens, I'm more likely to like revise that and like add space and air into it in order to like maybe inflate something.
Just like a
Uh
song.
yeah, like some space, like the pauses, the commas. Like I'm trying to think of like, okay, how can I just make this more musical on a base level, I guess. I think the poems I sent you, it's kind of like, I don't know, people in my cohort described it as like a novel in prose poem verse,
Hmm.
but I think it also has a lot to do with memoir, and I think it also has a lot to do with confessional poetry. So I see it as just drawing from a bunch of things and hopefully working in a synergistic way to like create something slightly newer and slightly different
Yeah.
in terms of the form, in terms of the container, where it's like, yes, I'm comfortable calling them prose poems. Um, but I'm also hoping that they're drawing enough from other sources that, people who ultimately read them feel like, okay, there's more happening here than just what's in front of me.
Hmm. I like that. What would you say your relationship is to Tucson, and like what part do you think it's played in shaping you as a writer and as a person overall?
Yeah, as someone who grew up in Tucson, born and raised, I felt like I wanted to get out of it as a kid. I wanted to move away as soon as I had that concept of like, okay, what do people do after high school? What do people do as adults? Like I was like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
And then the further away I got, like geographically and sort of emotionally from Tucson, the more I longed for it, of
Mm,
course, inevitably.
sure.
And I don't mean longing in the sense that like, oh, I want to live there again and I want to make a life there and I want to, whatever. I mean more so it occupies my imagination. I think growing up in the desert and growing up with these wide open spaces and the sky and the sand and whether it's sand dunes, although the area of Arizona I grew up in it's the Sonoran Desert. It's pretty lush when it rains, and it's not the typical desert you think of when you think of like the southwestern United States. It's not like high desert. It's not sand dunes. It's sort of like a lush desert.
Mm,
And I just, yeah, like my appetite for sunlight, my appetite for wide open spaces. I think about it a lot living in Syracuse.
I
Like,
bet.
it becomes a sort of refuge in my mind, or like a haven in my mind where I'm like, I really, and then I trick myself into thinking, well, if I got back there, I would be happier or something. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's just baked into who I am, in the sense that, like, not just in the sense that the way people interact there, or the way people relate to each other, or the way neighbors talk to each other. It's more like the natural aspects and the natural elements of that landscape. I think a lot about, especially during the winter here, and I think a lot about like the cultural sort of amalgamation of things that happens in Tucson. That I grew up like Ukrainian and Russian in Tucson, Arizona, uh, and there weren't a lot of us there.
Mm.
So I figured that like that environment is something I'm so familiar with and something that I respect and appreciate so much that I can't help but continue thinking about it as I like move from place to place and write about different things. It works its way. It like bleeds into the things whether I want it to or not.
Is nature and like culture involved? Like, I wasn't sure because one of your poems that you sent me, like, it talked briefly about nature, but kind of talked smack about like knowing and what it means. Like, do you care about nature at all? Or like, or do you think about it? Is it something that you're not at all, but is it something that you're like, nature, I want to think about that, like I want to think about it more. Is it blend, or does it blend with like culture and um place more so?
I think place for sure.
Mm,
I think a lot about like I feel very much like I'm a place-based person and a place-based writer.
yeah.
So I think with that, I care about nature because it defines my immediate surroundings. And I
Okay.
think inevitably it defines the culture of the place that I'm living in. Like, I had a really hard time when I first moved to Syracuse writing about anything other than the place I was currently in.
Mm,
And in some way, it's kind of, I think, positive to be in the present moment and exploring your surroundings. But I also, I mean, I get a lot of inspiration from like psychogeography and the
psychogeography.
yeah, psychogeography and the sort of wandering, the surrealist poetry of like Baudelaire and Rimbaud, and this kind of like, in which I'm not describing strictly as those poets are psychogeographical, but I think they
Sure.
have psychogeography working uh, in their poems.
Can we
I
have like
mean,
a specific definition of psychogeography? This is a new term to me. Sounds really interesting.
yeah, so I'm forgetting the French dude who kind of coined this or explored this in a major way. But the idea was that you work kind of associationally in a city where you're like wandering from place to place and like making note of your surroundings and how they influence your emotions and how
Uh-huh.
they influence your existence, like in a poetic sense, but also in like a literal sense. You go to a car wash, you hear the water and the steam and this and the mist and stuff, and I think it brings you back to other times when you heard water, or you were by the ocean or by
Mm.
a waterfall or something like this. There's not a lot of water in the desert. uh I mean, there are monsoons, but I think that like experience of absence, of dryness, of like sparseness, um worked its way into my emotional experience in Tucson a lot,
Hmm.
where I already felt quite different somehow. And then also the experience of nature like mirrored that. So I guess, I don't know, a lot of the work that I was working on prior to the poems I sent you was very place based in that way, where I was trying to figure out like, okay, here is an old like rundown building that I remember was a restaurant when I was a kid. And I went there with my family
Hmm.
and we ate these pancakes that were huge and filled with pecans or something, which like I'm talking from like an actual poem that I worked on.
Cool.
And I'm thinking like, okay, here's this place that has changed so much over time, but I have all these memories of it. And like, how am I interacting with my space now that I know that that place no longer exists? Like,
Mm.
I'm just staring at an empty storefront or a shuttered, building, and thinking like, okay, what do I do with these memories? What do I do with these experiences that I had at this place?
Yeah.
uh do I just burn them? I don't know. I mean, it's like they're kind of baked into my personhood, you know
There's like an oscillation of association in a way, like depending on what is where and when is what. It's like how you find your relationship maybe in that moment or in memory.
Yeah, and I find myself like escaping into memory. I mean, I think it's not an unusual coping strategy of like living inside your memories and thinking about like, you know, trying to cultivate a sense of safety that you had in other memories, or maybe the opposite, a time when things were less predictable but exciting or something. It's like that the hard times headline, like, man in his 30s reminisces about time he lived in big city for 2 years or something.
I
you
love the
know
hard times. I
it's
love
like I
that.
feel that constantly with different eras of my life, and like with different places I've lived in. I'm constantly like, and it's not really strictly like a romanticizing situation. It's more like, what do I do with all these experiences and all these people that I knew and all these places that I went and all these things I experienced? Like, I try to carry them with me into the next thing. But it's also like those things, a lot of the places in Tucson, for example, like Tucson's changed a lot. A lot of those places are gone. A lot of those restaurants are closed. Some of those people are dead. Some of those experiences I'll never have again.
It's interesting because like when I was reading the batch of poems you sent me, like I noticed a juxtaposition of like object with like emotion or memory often. No, the batch of poems you sent me, are they going to be in your manuscript? Or
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. So the manuscript that I kind of feel like is more done than not done is 50 poems.
Okay.
And this is part of it. It's broken down into three sections, so I picked some from each section. Yeah.
And so the quote in the beginning from Herman Hesse, that's like you're going to have that in the manuscript. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the epigraph.
The epigraph. I wanted to read it. I have no, oh yeah, let me preface that. It's a quote from a book that he wrote.
That's okay.
I have had to experience so much stupidity, so many vices, so much error, so much nausea, disillusionment, and sorrow, just in order to become a child again. Yeah, what made you want to use that quote?
Yeah, so I read Siddhartha for the first time in high school, uh, and I've reread it probably once a year since then. Like I'm kind of obsessed with it in the sense that it feels really, it's almost like hermetically sealed. Like it's just I don't know. I don't mean to call it like a perfect book or something, but it's
Okay.
just one of these it's just one of these things that I get more meaning out of the more I engage with it. And every time I read it like year to year, um I have a different sort of perception of it. And I was reading it, while I was kind of drafting these poems, and I was thinking about childhood. I was thinking about how childhood informs adult experiences
Hmm.
and experiences of illness and mental illness, especially. Like, how does childhood set us up to experience the things we experience as adults,
Yeah.
whether that's mental illness or hospitalization, like any sort of thing in that under that umbrella. And I was thinking about it as a way of like, there are poems in the manuscript that obviously you haven't read, and some of them dive into like, okay, what brings the narrator to this point? Like, what brings the narrator into the psych ward? And I mean, I guess some of the poems delve into that a little bit, but it's also the thing that's left out is childhood.
Mm.
And I think a lot about, I had kind of an unusual childhood in the sense that, my parents are musicians, they're immigrants. We grew up in Tucson, Arizona in the Southwest. And then all their idiosyncratic behavior on top of that. Uh, and they're kind of weaving into the culture of Tucson and like
Hmm.
being part of the musical community, but then being excluded from other communities because of their immigrant status or their like this, language
Yeah.
use. Um, had me thinking a lot about like how did childhood set me up in both good and bad ways to experience the things I experienced as an adult.
Mm.
Um, so that's really why I chose that quote. I also just really like that quote because it's like being a child again, people assume it's like, okay, that's you're reconnecting with your childhood self. It's like a sense of safety or a sense of like, you know, comfort. But
Hmm.
it's also not everybody's childhood is safe and comfortable all the time,
Nope.
you know? But there is something about connecting with, your childhood and your kind of inner child that makes you examine like the patterns that you have as an adult. And I think I think a lot about that in therapy. I think a lot about that in writing. Um, I'm always sort of, I don't know, thinking about it, I guess.
I have some things to think about. It's kind of inspire. It's in the way that I say that in the way that it's like kind of inspires me to think about like maybe there are some negatives, but also to like uplift like the positives too, like because a lot of times when we talk about like childhood, you're like, okay, how did childhood mess you up? Like everyone gets messed up in childhood somehow, but like I like talking about like the positive aspects too. That's good. That's cool. Why the title American Loon?
Yeah, so I like loons a lot. I had some formative childhood experiences, speaking of
Me too.
childhood, with loons. Yeah. You too?
Yeah, my grandpa loved loons. We would listen to the loons and watch the loons go underwater for a long time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the way they like glide down onto the water, it's so satisfying. It's like such a beautiful thing that like people will never be able to achieve. I mean, we have airplanes and whatever, but then you've seen like the water, the airplanes that like land onto the water and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can kind of mimic that experience or whatever, but nothing comes close to like watching a loon just merge with the water and just kind of like glide with its wings out like that. So part of it is like an obsession with the animal. Part of it is, the double meaning of loon, as in, like mentally ill or
Sure.
insane person. Um, yeah, and in terms of American, I mean, I see in some ways, I didn't realize this until like putting together and sequencing the poems in the
Uh-huh.
manuscript, but I see it as a critique, not strictly of America, but kind of like a more, yeah, no, you know what? I changed that. I do see it as a critique of America, but I also see it as a critique of like American mental health care.
Hmm.
And I think, as somebody, as a writer that thinks a lot about place, this is set in, an American psych ward. And so I can't talk about mental health in this context without being critical of my surroundings,
Sure.
and the institutions that make them happen. So it's a bird species. American loon is the bird species, as
The
opposed
bird's
to
what?
other loons. I'm sorry,
The bird's what?
bird species.
Oh, the bird
So
species.
it's
Yeah.
like North American loon
Hmm. Hmm.
is the species of bird, as opposed to, I think the European loon, or I don't know. There's other loons,
Yep.
uh, but yeah. So I think it functions on a couple different levels. Like I think it's a critical. It introduces the potential of criticism because I don't think these poems necessarily portray like the environment in a strictly positive light.
Sure.
And then also, I'm just working, I think, with multiple meanings or trying to achieve multiple meanings with that title. Yeah.
I really love that a lot. That's awesome. Um, as I know you work at the Everson Museum, I was looking at one of your course descriptions, one of the recent ones, and I wanted to ask you about it. It says, I'm going to read part of the course description. It says, how can our noticing of Nancy Friedman Sanchez, a Colombian American artist, dream map and cornucopia inform a poetic practice of resistance and remembering? How does it feel to leave room for image to inform text and for memory to inform art making? In this creative writing session, participants will write poems or flash stories in response to Friedman Sanchez's work, which engages the natural world, sociocultural, and gender identity and colonial history. That's a lot. How did you come up with this course description? And did you have a chance to talk to Nancy Friedman Sanchez about her exhibit at the Everson?
So I haven't talked to Nancy yet about the course or about her artwork. She's supposed to visit us in the fall, so I'm hoping to connect with her then. But the course, I wanted to engage with her artwork. The exhibition is these large, like massive window size, sort of mural installation pieces,
Hmm.
and it's ink on Tyvek, like the house wrap. And she's kind of like collaging onto these things. And I see writing, especially like prose poems and shorter fiction, as kind of a collaging, because it's in conversation with other genres of writing.
Cool.
Like a prose poem is inevitably in conversation with poetry, but it's also in conversation with prose. And then depending on the subject matter, it can also be in conversation with memoir or, any variety of like genre fiction, depending on, what you're writing about.
Hmm.
And I see Friedman Sanchez's artwork also as in conversation with so many different subject matters. And I mean, I'm not well versed enough in visual art to call it like different genres, but I think, she's using collage, she's using ink, she's using flora and fauna indigenous to Colombia, and she's using really she's, I think, performing or like achieving a sort of cultural criticism with her artwork. uh, of the things listed in the course description, but also just generally. I mean, she has this one where it's dream map and cornucopia with Trump trucks,
Oh,
and
interesting.
a lot of her. You should check out her artwork on her website. It's, I mean, all of her stuff is fantastic, but
Mm.
this one is like it's like a vessel, like a vase, and there's all these plants and
Oh yeah,
flowers coming out of it.
mhm.
Yeah. I think you can see it. You saw it on the webpage, right?
I did, but a
Yeah.
description is good. Yeah.
And and so there are these little trucks flying the flags. I mean, the Trump trucks on the side, kind of on the side of the mural.
Aha.
And I, I mean, I think it's hard to look at that and not be like, okay, this artist is engaging in cultural and sociocultural criticism of some kind, right? And I wanted to engage with that aspect of her work. I also wanted to engage with the dream logic that she kind of uses, in the sense that dreams are very associational, and I think her work is very associational in a lot of ways too.
And you have some
Um,
dream poems that I read, or they're in the title. There's dreams in the titles of the poems I read of yours.
right, yeah. I mean, I am thinking about dreams. I have really, really vivid dreams almost
Hmm.
every night, and my dreams, I mean, sometimes they're ordinary, but generally they're pretty clearly tied to like some sort of anxiety or like feelings of unpreparedness. Like,
Sure.
I used to read a lot of those dream analysis forums in high school.
Hmm.
Like, oh, I had this dream. What does it mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
am I going to die? I showed up to class without pants. Does it mean I'm feeling anxious or unprepared?
Yep.
Like this kind of thing. And I find dreams as really useful sources of inspiration for poems, but also like when you're in a psych ward, sleep is supposed to be restorative, and it's also like one of the few times when you're not, I mean, you're physically in the location still, but you're also dreaming you're outside of it. So in this particular context, the workshop, I wanted to engage with some of my own fascinations with dreams, some of her cultural criticism, and then also just kind of selfishly, I was like, I want to write more stuff about dreams. I want to figure out, like, why do I keep dreaming about hot dogs? Like, I dream about hot dogs all the time, and I don't know why. And it's like, yeah, I have some formative experiences eating Sonoran hot dogs in Tucson, but like, it's like every other dream, there's a hot dog or a sausage or the Wienermobile. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
why is this happening? So anyway, yeah.
That's funny because I had a I had a question. I did want to ask you about resistance and remembering, but maybe I'll ask a little bit later. But from your poem Dream Log titled Dream Log Art Institute of Chicago, one of the sections of the piece says, I sit on a bench in front of Chagall's American windows with a flask in my hand and cry, Nazis bombed Chagall's city and killed his people. He fled because he wanted to live and I don't, which makes me the asshole. Look at the way he captured blue and glass. What do I have? Liquid in a flask? That was one of those moments where I was like, oh, there's like an object. You use the object of the flask, but then there's this like kind of more grandiose meaning of like Chagall's work with the America windows, right? Like that was interesting to me. But then there was the dream aspect of it too. So like, did you just like dream that exactly, or like what parts? How did that poem form into what it is, and what's your thought about that piece?
I kind of I feel a little bit like I cheated with that one, because I when I lived in Chicago, I spent a lot of time going to the Art Institute. Used to work down the street, like literally half a block away from the Art Institute. And I would work doubles a lot, and so I would have like 2 3 hours between shifts. So sometimes I would go to Millennium Park and hang out, but more often than not, I would go to the Art Institute of Chicago and wander around. And they have the America windows kind of in the downstairs sort of gallery area. And I probably spent, I mean, over 40 hours just sitting on that bench and staring at that thing because
Mm,
at that piece of art, because it's so, I find the blue of it so soothing. And also the kind of folkloric and like storytelling aspects of that work of art and the glass panes, the way it filters the light into the
yeah.
gallery. I mean, there's just so many things about it. It's like every single day I went there, kind of like with Siddhartha, like every time I went there and sat there, I had a different experience of the artwork, you
Cool.
know? And so it occupied my imagination. And I thought about it a lot, and I would dream about it sometimes. And almost always it was sort of a soothing kind of thing.
Mm,
And I wondered, like, okay, what's actually happening to my emotional state as I'm like remembering sitting in front of this artwork and looking at it and engaging with it, because it's not, I mean, yeah, it's depicting, it has cool blue tones, and there's flying animals, and there's goats playing violin and people dancing and stuff. But
mhm.
it's also, the story of Chagall is not necessarily a strictly happy life story. I mean, he fled his hometown and had to make choices that I hope most people don't have to make in their lives. I mean, in the sense that, like, he left his hometown because he wanted to live, like in the poem, obviously, but he also left behind his people. And so, I was thinking, like, how does that relate to somebody in a psych ward who is experiencing suicidality?
Right.
Inevitably, there's like a life and death component that inflects my understanding of that artwork. So, yeah, that's kind of my thinking around that. I mean, it's another one of those things where I just spent a lot of time in front of this work of art and thought a lot about it and decided that I was finally ready to maybe like put it in a poem too.
There is, which part were you talking about him having to leave? Because I read that we definitely left occupied France during World War II. And then he was in, was it Moscow? And he was there after the Bolshevik Revolution, but he eventually left there as well.
Yeah, so he fled Vitebsk, I'm pretty sure it's called, which is his hometown in I it's was part of the USSR too at one point, I'm pretty sure. But he fled before that, he fled his hometown because Nazis bombed it, right? So I think he's had multiple experiences of like fleeing and settling and fleeing and settling.
I'll read the thing that I wrote. Something interesting to me in this poem is the act of, and I've mentioned this a little bit already, is the act of seeing this great artistic work, then looking down at an actional object, this flask, which of course contains alcohol. I feel like you do these connections in your poems where you connect something kind of mundane or seemingly mundane, like linoleum pops up in a couple of your poems, either looking at it or it's something happens to it, or a flask. Um, and the flask is like an actual object. And I think the I can't say that word, linoleum, it receives action by a Heimlich maneuver, bagel being spit out onto it. Something like to something like a beautiful work of art, or to something that's so much more complex. So like it's like, I don't know, it's still, I'm still interested in this like idea of like there's like something so simple happening that you can, that like kind of makes it, the poem or the work, feel grounded, or that you're actually, the narrator's recognizing. And then
Hmm.
this like really grandiose thing, like the thing about Chagall is like it's so expansive to think about all the things that he went through, and then to like narrow down the narrator's focus to like this flask. Like it's like a, it's almost like a funnel, you know?
Yeah, the objects I find can be really expressive, especially in prose poems, because it's already like you're describing a compressed form.
Hmm.
And so it lends the objects somehow more figurative weight. So when I was thinking about, okay, like what is the narrator holding? Like what is the narrator doing in this moment? I mean, I will admit that there were times, working in the hospitality industry in Chicago, where
Yeah.
I went to the Art Institute drunk.
Yeah.
And so part of it is based on real experience, but part of it is also like, the flask is like a self sort of destroying device.
Hmm.
Um, it's also like kind of a secretive thing in the sense that you hide your flask,
Yeah.
it's also like a convenience thing, I don't know. It has those like different associational qualities that I find really interesting. It also has like the Western, the cowboys and their flasks and this kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, that I was maybe trying to engage with a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I find in poems that like objects can almost be more expressive than people sometimes.
Mm.
Because yeah, you have people, you have characters, engaging with each other and having conversations, but like for a narrator to be holding something or like engaging with whether it's the floor or a flask or the food at the, in the psych ward, like all of these things, I feel like I'm a very thingy person. I think a lot
Hmm.
about objects. Like we were talking about the pawn shop earlier. I'm always like,
Hmm.
I don't know, hunting for bookshelves or like cool rugs or cool rings or chains or watches or I think a lot about things sometimes,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the work that I sent you is just things that have been on my mind a lot over the
Yeah.
course of the past year or two, especially in the past year.
Hmm.
And so the objects just work their way into it. So I think, part of it is like an obsessive quality, and part of it is the fact that it can be an expressive like narrative tool too.
Mm. Okay. I'm really interested in your piece called Fall, particularly because it seems quite like a dramatic scene involving nudity, handcuffs, the Buffalo Bills, and to me, like a longing for a certain type of connection. How was it writing that piece? And is there a story behind it?
So the manuscript that this is part of is sort of a blending of two separate psych ward visits, one when I was 18
Hmm.
and then one over a year ago. And so this is more drawing from that initial psych ward visit when I was 18,
Yeah.
which did happen in, a small town in New York, close to Syracuse. And I think a lot of it is just recounting events, but also events that I wasn't ready to talk about until now, basically.
Mm.
Um, because when I look back on that initial hospitalization, the sequence of events is so surreal and ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then when I put them down and write them out on paper or on my computer, I'm like, no, that's actually what happened.
Mm.
Like, I was legitimately, I mean, this is autobiographical to some degree, but, um, and I don't mean to like say that that's like the only inspiration here or the only thing
Sure.
I'm interested in having a conversation with, but like, it feels very much like once I was able to just sequence the events on the page, that something emerged where I was like, okay, there's a story here. Like, this is not one of the first poems that I wrote in this manuscript. It was toward the end that I wrote this one because I don't think I was like emotionally quite ready to confront that.
Sure.
Um, but once I did, it felt like I could bring, it's one thing to like talk about your experiences, and another thing to like write about them and like make
Yep.
art with them, right?
Yeah.
So once I could kind of write it out and then make the sequence of events the way, appear the way that they actually happen, I realized I could bring certain weight to things. And then as I did that, I also started like remembering certain details of that initial like trip to the hospital. Like
Hmm.
I started to remember what the cops said. I started to remember thinking about my grandpa, like, you know, these things that I didn't even remember before, but just started to remember with more clarity.
Mm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is it felt like a therapeutic exercise. Um, and also for the purpose of the manuscript too, I wanted to kind of show the before portion of it, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because it's like, yeah, you have the psych ward, you have all the scenes that happen in the psych ward, but even as I've, was reading through the poems, I was like, okay, what happens before? What leads us to this point?
Mm.
And so, in some ways it's like a scene setting or like explanatory device. Um, from like a narrative point of view.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. It almost, how you describe it, the construction almost sounded like script writing in a way.
Mm.
This question I have is it's a little bit broad, but I just really want to ask you this question. What's your opinion on generational trauma, and what kind of relationship do you think you have to it, if at all?
Mm. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think about my parents' experiences a lot because they have a more direct link to they have a more recent link to our family's generational trauma because they fled the USSR to come to this country and then settled in Arizona eventually. But I also feel like their experiences of living as Jewish people in the USSR, and then my dad's experience of being born in Ukraine and coming to the USSR, and my mom's experience of having Ukrainian roots, but growing up in Russia and like identifying mostly as a Russian person.
Mm,
These things like inform their current experiences and their current lives.
yeah.
And having been raised by these people, things like, little things like my mom hates lines. Like
Your mom
she
hates what?
lines, like waiting in
Oh,
lines.
lines. Like,
Yeah,
oh, okay, wait, okay. Interesting. Oh,
because it activates some sort of traumatic memory for her of the USSR.
mm,
And I think it's also like a generational memory of waiting in line for food or supplies, um, and of scarcity, right? Like,
hmm.
so she just has like an outsized reaction sometimes to having to wait in line or like being at a counter and like having a few people ahead. Like she will just leave a restaurant sometimes or like leave a coffee shop because there's too many people.
Wow.
And I used to be like, oh, mom, that's like so annoying. Like you need to just like get with it. And then I was
Yeah.
like, no, more recently, I started to realize that like a lot of their behaviors and a lot of my behaviors are dictated by my experience of inheritance, like the things that I've inherited that I didn't ask to inherit,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and not, I'm not just talking about like, having family members who perished in the Holocaust or were murdered in the Holocaust, rather, but also like just the experiences of uh, being othered at every sort of step of life.
Hmm.
Like my parents not being recognized for who they were in the USSR, not being recognized as who they are in the United States, in the sense
Hmm.
that, like, you know, they were Jews in the USSR and in the United States, they're Russians. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot about generational and intergenerational trauma I think a lot about how it influences these little things, these little behaviors, like interacting with a server or a bartender or like a host at a restaurant, you know. I think a lot about it in those contexts because it really bubbles to the surface. Like I think certain uh interpersonal interactions really reveal somebody's experiences. Like I used to think like, oh yeah, uh you can really judge somebody based on how they treat their server or their bartender. And it's I think that is true, but it's also you're talking about like somebody could get activated in terms of their intergenerational trauma and you have no idea what's happening, right? Like
Yeah.
the server or the bartender has no idea what's happening, the guest of that person has no idea what's happening, and these are things that just continue to work themselves into our interactions. So I guess I don't know, I'm working on a lot of, I've been in therapy for a few years and more intensively in the past year. And I think a lot of the type of work I'm trying to do at least is to contend with these things, to contend with the fact, not just the fact that I've like inherited intergenerational trauma, but also like the fact that it's influencing me in ways that I'm not even completely aware of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, I'm curious to read the whole manuscript eventually and see like maybe like points that might bubble up a little bit more than others, like in your writing. I'm curious if it does, you know. Seems like a lot of writers have like a lot of intersectionality in their identities where it's really hard to understand that like actually know like the how that person might treat a waiter might just be because they're from another country and they it's a completely
Right.
different way to interact, you know, like it's just not like we're used to a certain way, but other people are used to a certain way too.
I will say too, though, that, because my parents are musicians, they're always performing pieces by other composers, you know?
Okay.
They're not generally like writing and performing their own music. They're playing dead people, music by dead people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's its own sort of conversation and its own, like they're in conversation with those composers and those traditions. But I think there's also something about like me wanting to pursue art of my own, like
Mm-hmm.
not that it's any less technically demanding or difficult or complicated to do, but I wanted to use language to create my own things. I think partially because um I have seen my parents make music written by other people their entire lives and receive satisfaction from it, but also it's like it becomes a sort of healing process when I I don't know, this expression like break, like making making steps towards breaking the cycle of what I've inherited
Sure.
and trying to work toward like healing these things. I think pursuing writing and poetry is that in a way, because I'm writing towards expression, but I'm also writing toward healing the parts of myself I didn't know really needed healing,
Mm.
until I started doing it, until I started writing.
That's really beautiful. I'm happy for you. I laugh, but I am really happy. You know, like I'm just like that's really cool that you are even, you know, understanding your work in that kind of clear way, like today. Like it seems, you know, because man, when you start out, like when I was starting out, I was like, well, I just like did this thing and like, you know, people read it and they felt something. So like, why do I need to think about it any further? Like, why do I
Mhm.
need to reflect on that? But that's not actually what it is. It's like kind of like your how I see you're doing it is like you're writing and reflecting and then writing and reflecting and kind of like building up clarity of like being able to like, you know, talk about how these things are you're talking about are coming about and like how you see it structurally functioning, you know? And that's cool. To it sounds like very healthy and like a you have like an open communication with your work.
I'm trying to. I mean, I'm really trying to follow the advice of one of my undergrad professors, Fareed Matuk, who said that you should be as nerdy about your own work as you should be about other people's work that you admire.
Mm,
And I, at first, I was like, okay, isn't that like an egotistical, pursuit? Like,
hmm.
I should be nerdy about my own work, like analyze it, like write essays about it.
Yeah.
And Fareed was like, yeah, basically, like, I mean, not write essays about it, like, as in, a book review of your own book or something, but like, engage with it on that level. And I'm trying to do that more just because I'm realizing a lot of the things I write, I bring into therapy too.
Mm,
And I talk about them with my therapist, and it's really helpful because I talk about things in poems I don't always talk about in person. And it's really deeply therapeutic because of, I think, the associational qualities of some of these poems too
hmm.
that I bring in. They just access certain things that I'm not able to access on a daily basis because of any variety of things, like I'm hungry, or I didn't sleep very well, or I stubbed my toe, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about that, and I'm not thinking about the more, the other things that are worth thinking about. So
Well, thanks for doing this interview. I appreciate you taking the time and giving your peace of mind of your writing and talking about it.
it was my pleasure. This was great.